Good afternoon and welcome to our IABC DC Metro and Heritage Region webinar, Managing Communication for Results and Value. My name is Heather McElrath and I'm president of the IABC DC Metro Chapter. More than ever before, business leaders are asking their communication professionals to shift from a focus on distributing news and information to helping execute their business strategies in ways that improve results and add value. Today, IABC Fellow Jim Shaffer, who has guided many communication practitioners through this process, will share his proven methodology. Jim is an internationally recognized business advisor, leadership coach, author, speaker, and leader of the Jim Shaffer Group, a team of seasoned advisors devoted to improving strategy execution through strong leaders and engaged people. Previously, Jim was a principal, vice president, and a global leader of a Towers parent, now Willis Towers Watson, Center of Excellence. He was an architect and a leading practitioner of the firm's change management consulting practice. His book, The Leadership Solution, immediately became a popular treatise on leadership, change management, and creating high-performance organizations. A regular contributor to many business publications and frequently quoted in business journals, Jim has taught at several prominent graduate schools of business. He speaks regularly at leadership groups and professional organizations. Jim is a longtime member of the IABC DC Metro Chapter and a past Communicator of the Year honoree. Before we begin, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. I'd like to introduce Amy Miller, an IABC Heritage Region board member and our tech associate for this webinar. Amy will review a few points to help you gain the most from this experience. Amy?
Thank you, Heather. Everyone, if you would like to watch today's webinar in full screen mode, then mouse to the top right portion of your screen and you'll see 4 small arrows. Click on that symbol to toggle in and out of full screen mode. During the presentation, if you'd like to send us a comment or question for discussion, please use the chat button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just mouse down to the bottom of your screen and your toolbar will appear, including the chat button. Jim will pause to take questions briefly during the presentation and will also answer questions at the end. If you'd like to join the conversation via chat later, right now we're showing some thoughts that may spur ideas for you. Also, today's webinar is being recorded. As a registered attendee, you will receive the following: a link to our very brief survey as you leave the webinar. Please take a moment to respond so we can keep making improvements. You'll also get an email with links to the recording of today's webinar and the slides, as well as the survey link in case you miss it on your way out of today's session. And now back to Heather.
Thanks, Amy. Now let's get started. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, what a great opportunity to have so many people. We understand there's well more than 150 people who signed up for this. And one of the things that came to my mind was that we have 2 things in common. Number one, we're communication practitioners and professionals who want to add more results and add more value. And the second thing is we all need haircuts. I got it this morning. I said, when is that salon going to open up again? And my wife told me in a week here in Annapolis, Maryland. So welcome. It's nice to have you here. I want to share with you some of the slides here. I'm trying to make that little share. Okay, I'm going to hit share screen now, Amy.
Yep, share screen and then select the PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to take you to the first page here. This has been sponsored by the IABC DC Metro area and the IABC Heritage Region webinar, which is largely on the East Coast. Fabulous people who I've had the opportunity to work with many, many times, and it's fun to be able to get back together during these times and talk about things that will help us all add more value. Trying to make this advance, and it's not advancing.
Just click into it and then you should be able to advance.
Okay. No, still not advanced. Oh, there we go. Okay. I want to share with you from a number of people who I talk to when I'm working with my clients in all kinds of industries. And one of the things that I think has spawned what we're talking about today is that people have different perceptions of communication practitioners and what they are doing and what they could be doing and what they need to do. And I'd like to start with a comment by the Chief Executive Officer of a consumer packaged goods company that I've done an awful lot of work with out in the Midwest. And what he said to me was the first thing our communication people do is decide what activity they'll deploy way before they think about the root cause of the problem. I want them to start with the result they need to create, then decide what tactic to deploy. And I was talking to somebody just the other day, a communication person, and they were asking me about when do I start doing this sort of thing in the communication area? And I said, once you've decided what the problem is and what the root cause of the problem is, then you can identify what it is that you need to do differently with what kind of media or what kind of activity. The Senior Vice President of Marketing, the large pharmaceutical in the Midwest, who I did a lot of work with, said something on another variation here, and that is our communication people are worried about the wrong things. I tell them about a business problem I'm having, and they trot out the same activities. They worry about click-throughs, opens, mentions, share voice, awareness, and retweets. I'm worried about sales and gross margin. Where can I find communication people who can help us improve our business? In the case of the Senior Vice President of Marketing, I shared this with the communication people, and they said they had no idea that he felt that way about the communication people, which was useful because what they did is they went to him and said, okay, we want to do it the way that you want it, and it does make sense to focus on things that matter most to the business. Will you support us in that effort? And they all said, absolutely yes. So I think what's happening oftentimes with communication people and their leadership teams is they're not talking sometimes about the same sorts of things. And what I've been seeing in the last couple of years, at least, is that there's a lot more of those conversations than there have been in the past. Here's a Populo survey of communication professionals. Populo is a communication survey organization, and they help a lot with communication distribution as well. And I spoke at their a conference that they had recently in Dallas. And one of the things that the communication people said is that we aren't perceived as adding value. We have the wrong priorities and/or we lack competencies needed to affect business results. So what I think these last three slides have said is that we've got several different groups of people all saying much the same thing. We need to add more results, we need to add more value, and we need to do different kinds of things in a different kind of way. And I think that that's what I'm seeing with an awful lot of people that I'm working with, as well as others who I'm not working with. They're moving in this direction of focusing on results and value. Here are 6 people here I've worked with, all have been clients of mine, and they all have made this move from the communication news distribution role to the role of having a significant impact on the performance of the business. Now, they didn't just go off and do this on their own. They have worked with other communication people. I worked with them in all cases. These various people came to me and said, I read your article or I heard your speech or whatever. I want to be one of those that's improving performance. Kristen Kelly, who I just spoke with this morning, she's up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she was telling me about the productivity increase that we had created in Del Mar, New York. She had attended a meeting with Roger Dupree and myself. Some of you, I'm sure, know Roger Dupree, and if you don't know his book about leaders, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that just came out, and I strongly recommend that book, Roger Dupree, D''APRIX. Kristen and I attended this workshop, and she came back home to her location in Toledo, and she said to her President Dave Brown, she said, I have just learned of a lot of things that are going on in our industry, and I want to take advantage of it. And she started showing them some of the things that came from the slides that we used at that session in New York. And she said, I want to do this. And so she introduced me to the president, and he wanted us to talk to the top 40 people, which we did. They all came up to her afterwards and said, we appreciate what you're trying to do to add more value to the organization. Scott Myers, who was the head of manufacturing, came up and says, I've got the perfect place in Del Mar, New York for you to launch your first project. And in Del Mar, we were able to improve productivity by 8.5%, total savings $737,400 with a 700% ROI. Bob Kula's boss at that time, and you're going to meet her in a few minutes, said that they were having a big change in the Marshall, Missouri plant at ConAgra Foods, and wanted Bob to go in and help the leader there. And Bob said, I'd like to do that. Can I have some support? And so Bob and I worked there about 5 or 6 months, and were able to bring damage down, as you can see, by 65%. Productivity went up by 16%. Courtney Reynolds wasn't able to get the people in the Lubbock operation of ITT Corporation. And so she and I got together, and we were able to improve on-time delivery and sales. They were able to get on-time delivery up, and that brought more customers back to the business. Scott Fiedler at FedEx was in a very similar situation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Anna Roach in a minute. And then Dave Jackson, who had a 50% reduction in recordables in an operation that he was working with in Ohio, and a 50% reduction in rework. It is spectacular when you see the opportunities that people have and get in there, and with some help are able to make some real progress. All of these people, by the way, are in much different roles than they were at one time. In fact, one of these people here was making $175,000 a year. And when that person, I won't say whether it was a he or she, that person started improving the performance of their organization, somebody came along and took her away from them, and the pay went up to just under $400,000. So what I said was, for those of you who I hope are still with us, we were talking about the system. Instead of communicating activities, we want to manage the communication system. And if we look at the communication system in an organization, it has really 3 components. Number 1 are the sources of communication / information. The second is the content. And the third then is the business results that we're trying to improve. If you look at the sources part of this slide, there are 3 of them. Leaders, that is what they say and what they do, what they don't say and what they don't do. Second is systems, like learning and development, reward systems, all the systems that are inside an organization to help drive performance. And then finally, the formal channels that communication practitioners have been very familiar with, from newsletters to video to et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the percentages there, those are the percentages of the impact that those various different sources have on an organization. And so you see leaders with 60 to 65%. Leaders, what they say, again, and what they do are very, very powerful and have the largest influence on the organization. What that says to us is that as we're looking at trying to fix communication problems or gaps in an organization, or if we're getting certain kinds of performance that isn't right, then what we need to do is focus primarily on leaders. The second then is to make sure that our systems are aligned, to make sure that they're aligned with what the leaders are saying and what they're doing. And then finally, the formal channels. The important part of this is that this gives the communication people an opportunity to broaden their skills beyond formal channels into leadership development issues as well as systems alignment. The second piece of this is content, and that is what we send out. There are 5 kinds of information that people need to perform at their peak. The first is context, and that is, make this all make sense. I want to make sure that I'm doing the right things and that there's proper fit. The second is vision, which is a picture of the future. And then secondly is the strategy, which is how we're going to get there, our plan to realize the vision. Thirdly is linkage, and that is to connect people. And so we connect people with reward systems and with some of the other systems that we talked about. And then finally, support. That is, what kind of support do I get, whether it's tools or training or whatever? What do I get in order to perform at my peak? I see the bar that says new share. Do you want me to click that, Amy? It was doing that, popping up as new share.
You're fine.
Okay. All right. So this is the communication system, and what communication practitioners are now doing much more so than in the past is they're saying, instead of focusing on formal channels, I can now manage this entire system, and I can have more impact on the organization instead of what has been my impact in the past, which has been largely a distribution process. So it's a really exciting thing that the communication people are grabbing a hold of and having a lot of fun with it. So what do we want our internal clients, what do they want? When you talk about the Senior Vice President of Marketing for the company I talked about and some of the others, what are the things that I try to make sure that my clients get from me, just as I know that some of the communication practitioners who are making this move are doing these kinds of things. Number one is make a positive business impact. Make sure that what you're doing does affect the business in a positive way. Number two, understand our business. All too often I hear people say, well, our communication people don't really understand the business of the business. That's going away. An awful lot of communication people are becoming very, very business focused. And so I would say that we're making a significant step in that direction. Also, provide perspective. Let us know what's going on in the outside world. You know, what did ITT Corporation do when they went through this sort of process? What have we learned from that? Brainstorm with us. What if? How about trying this? And that sort of thing. So, and having an outside perspective. They also are looking for relationships, not just transactions. And so it's really, really important that our communication professionals are being responsive to our internal and our external clients. This is Anna Roach. Anna Roach attended a workshop that I conducted in Chicago about 10 years ago, and she called me after. I don't think I met her at the workshop, but she contacted me afterwards, and she said, I heard you at the such and such workshop in Chicago, and I would like you to work with me to help me try to improve the performance of the business. And she said, here's a quote, not only did the internal communication function begin to add more value, it gained a newfound respect. And one of the things that you're going to see here in a little bit is the successes that she had at the Sara Lee Bakery Group in Chicago. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Oh, here it is, 18% improvement in yield. Yield means this in a bakery. Let's imagine you're in your kitchen and you're going to make a cake, and the cake requires flour. And so you're walking across the kitchen floor and you've got flour in a small bowl, and you trip and half that flour falls out onto the floor. You go get the water and the stuff, and you clean it all up and go get more flour and come back and make the cake. Well, that's called yield improvement when you don't have that effort. So if you lose that, you've lost yield, and that goes down. That's a cost because you have to go back and get more flour to make that cake. If you can make sure that you use the same amount of flour every time and you don't make that mistake, then your yield improvement will go up. Within 1 month, Anna's yield improvement at that Sara Lee Bakery went up by 18%. That's huge when you're talking about a big bakery like what we were working in. I'd like to stop now and let's see if there are questions or thoughts from anybody.
Thank you, Jim. Before we get to the questions, I wanted to thank everyone for staying with us during our technical issues. We appreciate your patience and some of your very kind comments in the chat section. So yes, let me go to a question. Jim, how do you advise clients that present your business problems as communications problems?
Well, it matters if they are the same, because an awful lot of business problems are caused by communication breakdowns. I'm going to be talking about one that I did with Bob Kula, who we talked about earlier. But I think there's the two things here. Is number one, communication breakdowns are business breakdowns, and so oftentimes that's a legitimate claim to make. If somebody's using an excuse and just saying it's not a business problem, it's a communication problem, then that's an opportunity for a communication professional to dive in and say, I can help identify what the target goal is that we're looking for. I can identify where the problems are breaking down and the communication is not working, and then I can fix that. But I'm not fixing communication for the sake of fixing communication. I'm fixing communication to fix a result that we need to improve. So I would suggest that you simply adopt the fact that communication breakdowns contribute to a lot of problems, but you're coming at it from a communication perspective and the other person's coming at it from a business perspective. The fact is that many times they're one and the same thing.
That's interesting. Thank you, Jim. Let's take one other that is based on your slide you just had. My question is, how did Anna exactly improve the yield? It wasn't flour, correct?
Well, in that case, it wasn't flour. It was a number of different things. But what she did was she identified what the problem was, or the result problem was, and then there was a yield problem. And so what we did is we brought together a group of people in the bakery to tell us in a focus group or two, and to tell us exactly what it is that they did and what was causing, in their judgment, what was causing the yield loss. And they were the best of people because they stepped forward and said, we know there's a problem with that. And that's could be cutting into our pay, it could be cutting into our training and other things. And so we mapped the whole process, the baking process, on a big brown paper wrapped around the room. And we were able to identify 3 or 4 things that were contributing to that yield loss problem. And so we put a couple of teams together and identified very specific things to do within a period of about a month. And this is the kind of result that we got. They were excited about it. We also put sort of a little gift. And when I say gift, means a party or a lunch or whatever. And so they had a little bit of an incentive to do that. But more importantly, they had an incentive to do it because they knew that if they were doing it right, they were earning more money for themselves and for the organization.
Jim, let's take one more question. Let's take what this, oh wait, I'm sorry, I apologize. I had it right. Actually, Jim, why don't you move on? I apologize for the confusion and the trouble. Why don't you move on and I'll have more questions at the end.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay, let's do that. All right, here's something I recommend that the communication people address, and that is this process of making the move to becoming a strategic advisor. It's a very disciplined process, and it has the right steps in the right places. I've worked with lots of organizations on this right here, and let me talk a little bit about this. Number one is to get the leaders on board so that you really have the top people throughout the organization, whether it's department managers or the chief executive officer. The second is to assess the capabilities, and I'm going to take you through each one of these steps, then build a business case, and then improve results. So if you do it in that kind of a stepwise process, you're going to start moving to the point where you have the support of the leadership, you are helping the organization to take the place to a higher level, and you're improving results. Let's go into each one of those. If you have an opportunity to meet with your leadership team and talk with them about what you can do with them and for them, here are the kinds of comments that I hear that leaders like to hear. Number one, I want to add more measurable value to our organization. Well, which one sitting around the table wouldn't want that? Of course. I want to be less focused on activity and more focused on results. Wow, we'd like to hear that, Karen. Thank you very much. I don't like being a cost center. I want to create value for us. I know a way, Terry said. I'd like to share with you what best practice communication functions are doing. And that's exactly what Kristen Kelly did. After she was at Rogers in my workshop in New York, she went back out to Toledo, where her boss was, and said, I want to move in this direction. I want to show you the kinds of companies that are already doing it. When Dave Brown, her president, saw what they were doing, he said, we could be doing that here. Kristen, would you like to lead that effort? And that's what started with the Del Mar, New York process, and then went to about 8 or 10 different operations throughout the country. So here's Kristen. As I said, I talked to her, she called me this morning, say hi. Leaders want to make their numbers. So when our leaders saw others getting the kinds of performance gains we were able to help them generate, they wanted more of the same. I'm going to talk a little bit later about pilots. And one of the things that I've used pilots very successfully is if you go into a small area and create a significant win, other people are going to say, hey, Kristen, come over here and help me with that. And that's what happened with moving from Del Mar, New York to Newark, Ohio, where she also helped turn that operation completely around. So those are the kinds of techniques that would be useful for communication people to help them get started on this. So get the leaders on board first. Number 2 is to conduct an assessment of what you're doing today. There's a term called a value to cost assessment. You can see it at the top of the screen here. What we're trying to measure here is the value given the cost to fix communication problems. This is a very, very good assessment, and the people who enjoy this are the CEOs. I was doing work with Rick Wagner, who was chairman of the board of General Motors about 10 or 12 years ago. And when I told him about the value to cost assessment, he said, this is like portfolio management to me. And that's exactly what it is. We're managing a portfolio of activities and solutions. So if you look at the axis on the left here, you've got the vertical axis, which is how important is it to improving the business of the business. The second is how well is it performing right now? And so you can calculate what the costs are of these communication activities simply by adding up the amount of money it's spent on people, add the operating costs and that sort of thing. And so you can take project A or news generation B or whatever it might be, and from that then allocate that properly. And usually what we use is some form of a survey. So we go through the communication operation that's expanded beyond the department itself, and we identify what these costs are, and then we plop them down in this 4-box matrix that you see here. Well, what that's telling us is that you have everything that's down in the lower 2 boxes is unimportant, and you've got the things over on the left 2 boxes as being underperforming. So you got huge opportunity. What we then do with the communication effort here is what we say is, okay, how are we going to take each one of these and either improve them, get rid of them, what are we going to do about it? And then we create a communication plan that enables all these activities to go up into that upper right box. That's our goal, to take the $450,000 that we're spending over on the other side. Now we have $450,000 improving things by redeploying things so that everything is important and everything is performing well. Value to cost assessment is, I think, the best measurement for our communication function than any other. Yes, readership surveys and things like that are important, but this is focused on the business of the business. And the CEOs, the business leaders of the organization, they understand this stuff because, as I say, Rick Wagner called it portfolio management, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're managing the portfolio of the business. Okay, after we've conducted the assessment, then what we need to do is identify what competencies we need to have. And in the particular case that I'm using here, these competencies were developed by one of the large companies that I work with. And so what they said we need to make sure we have in our leadership team is we need to have change management competencies, leadership competencies, consulting and business advisor competencies, business and financial literacy, and the one that's right below that I can't see because of the thing that's in front of it, measurement. Okay, so how does this help? Well, the communication role becomes more proactive, from communicating about change to communicating to change. The competencies, when expanded, provide increased opportunities with leaders. And so the communication people now can spend time working with their leaders to help improve their skills and their knowledge and with communication excellence. They're able to bring a logical, fact-based, thoughtful set of solutions to the problem when you are acting as a business advisor. If you're just sending stuff out, that's good, but there's not a return there that could be. And then the business and financial literacy, I find that, like I was at one time, I didn't have the business and financial literacy that I needed. And so I spent a lot of time working with leaders as I was working with, and I said, I want your help in learning about this, and I'm willing to do more than just put stuff out. And so it builds credibility with the business professionals, and then finally focuses work on measures that matter. So instead of focusing on some of the things that communication people focus on, we're focusing on the things that matter the most. Like, you know, I've got a whole list of things that people oftentimes measure, but it doesn't make any difference whether measures go up or down. They don't have much effect on the business. So that is another big piece of it. The third is to build a business case. And one of the best ways to build a business case is to have what's called a value proposition. And that is a promise of value to be delivered, the primary reason a client should buy from you. And I'm talking about external and internal clients, but mostly internal clients, because oftentimes we do stuff, but we don't know necessarily whether it's adding any value or not. And so one of the things we need to create is a value proposition. I'm going to introduce you to Teresa Paulson, who was at the time that we worked together. She was also the vice president of communication at ConAgra Foods. And it was Bob Kula, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit, who contacted me because she told him, with this new plant operation in Marshall, Missouri, and the fact that they needed to do some things differently from a communication standpoint. Bob was 32 years old, but did not have a lot of experience in that area, was a top communication guy, but didn't have some of the kinds of experience that he wanted. And so Teresa was kind enough to say to Bob, work with Jim and build the kinds of competencies that you need to be able to do that. Now, we worked with Teresa to create this value proposition. And so we created it, and then we sat down with Gary Rodkin, who at that time was the CEO, and she presented it to him and said, this is what our value proposition ought to be. We need to help the company either make money or save money. If it doesn't make or save money, we don't do it. And Gary Rodkin, being a very super leader, CEO, he said, absolutely, that makes sense. And she said, well, I gotta have a conversation with you about this, because you're saying that right now, but we may have some things that are your favorite little things that are not making money or saving money, and we're going to point those out to you. And he said, well, that'll never happen. Well, within the first 2 weeks, it did happen. And she said, see, I told you were going to be doing that, and that you would be resisting not doing that little pet peeve or pet thing that you had going. And he laughed and he says, I got it. Now I want you to have our senior level people, I'm going to put them together, and I want you to explain why and how you're going to make sure that we live by that communication value proposition. We're not going to do stuff that doesn't make or save money anymore. Yeah, that kind of takes some people's fun stuff away from them, but if it's not adding or saving value, the shareholders certainly don't care about that. So then the next thing is to start, stop, and continue. You take the value proposition and you say, what are we going to stop doing? What are we going to start or do continuously? And so you can look down this left side here. We're going to stop doing anything that has no clear connection to the business strategy, doesn't change how work gets done. You can read those for yourself, and I'll be glad to send you these slides. We're going to start or continue doing these things on the right side. And so it's really important that we understand what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, because if we just say make or save money, that has different connotations to different kinds of people. So it's really important that you nail it down and you say specifically, here's what you're going to do and here's what you're not going to do.
Jim, this is
Yes.
Heather. I just want to give you a heads up that we have about 15 minutes left.
I understand that. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thanks.
Okay, so the final thing is to improve results. If results don't get improved, then you're not going to be perceived as the strong strategic advisor than if everything you do is focused on results. And so the important thing is to make sure that the business and communication strategies align with each other and that you're driving results. A lot of people say, well, where do I get started? And I've put together a series of questions here. And that is, the first thing is, where are the best opportunities to improve performance by better managing communication? Not improve communication, improve performance by better managing communication. What's the size of the opportunity? What are the root causes of the underperformance? What will it cost to improve? Is that return on investment acceptable? And that should be able to guide you. Those 5 questions guide you in terms of what you take on and what you not take on. Pilots, I mentioned that early on. And one of the things that I love are good pilots that prove winning is doable. And it needs to represent value and leverage. That is, you can get something out of it and leverage to other places. You get strong, potentially strong leadership. Operating below expectations, you want to improve it. People can control the outcomes, and success would be meaningful to the rest of the company. And what these are the questions you ask yourself as you are assessing the communication in the organization and the extent to which you're going to gravitate toward getting pilots up and running so that you get these kinds of results on this slide. I'm going to talk about one activity here, project we did. We started out with FedEx, and essentially what they did is they had asked me to do a communication assessment for them, which I did. And I was meeting with Terry Simpson, who was the head of communication, and Dave Brunzak, who is now CEO of FedEx. And basically what we wanted to do was get more export sales out of someplace in the United States. Most people didn't know FedEx was even in the export business. And so one of the things that we ended up doing is putting a communication strategy together, going out to Los Angeles, meeting with people to identify what was holding people back from selling export business. So the communication strategy was there to improve the knowledge of the business. Customer communication was not good in terms of understanding that FedEx was in the business. And there was an incentive called Finders Keepers that kept couriers from selling the business at the loading dock. Instead, they were encouraged through the incentive plan to get back to the station, as they called it. And what that did is that took away their opportunity to sell. So we fixed that with a communication strategy that created the Finders Keepers incentive. In the end, this is at over 90 days, we had 23% increase in sales. We had a 1,447% return. They asked us then to go to 5 more locations, Seattle, Denver, Chicago, New York, and Miami. And we've got a $6.1 million in sales increase and 1,660% return on investment. This is building and executing a strategy that got rid of problems that were impeding FedEx's opportunity to improve export sales. This is Terry Simpson talking about being able to go to your CEO and saying our communication improved revenues by 23%, or we saved $1 million, and I can prove it buys you a lot of because you're adding value. So the important thing she said here is it doesn't matter that you're at the table, it matters what you do when you're there, and I couldn't agree more. So pilots, again, I mentioned these are the strengths of it. You saw the slide earlier that had the same thing on there. One other final project, and this is with Bob Kula. Bob Kula and I went to an operation close to Indianapolis, Indiana, to help them get rid of costs due to damage in their distribution centers. And one of the things that we found were the communication strategy was imbalanced. One of the most important things that was imbalanced was the reward system. The reward system, the incentive compensation for the managers of the business was focused on productivity. Productivity caused people in forklifts to hurry, get it done fast, and they were hitting things and causing damage, and that damage was about $2 million a year. So we changed the incentive that was communicating the wrong things. Instead of productivity, quality, and safety, it was all productivity. We created 33 and a third percent, a third and a third and a third on each one of those three targets: productivity, quality, and safety. And within a very short period of time, we had a damage reduction of 65% and a productivity increase of 15%. So these are examples of how you use pilots, and then you start connecting things that are maybe a little bit foreign to what communication people like I was at one time. But Bob, this is Bob. This approach has provided a clear path to how I can help the company deliver sustainable, measurable financial results and change what leaders expect from communication people. Let me pause there because I know you want to possibly open up for some questions.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Let's take one or two since we are a little short on time. We have about 9 minutes left. There's a really great one that I want to get to. It's, if I can read it, I'm so sorry. Do leaders really expect that comm practitioners have the skills or authority to conduct analysis? And what happens when the analysis points to a problem that is not solved by communications?
Start with the first one you said.
Oh, hold on one second, sorry.
Yeah.
Do leaders really expect that communications practitioners have the skills or authority to conduct analysis?
The answer is very clearly no in most cases, unless the people have done like Bob and Kristen and others. The answer is that they don't expect communication people to be able to do this. I know for a fact that communication people can do this, but they need to be introduced to it. They need to be working with somebody who can help them not make mistakes as they learn. But one of the issues, big issues with the CEOs of the world and the others is that communication people are there to get this stuff out. And we're not interested in what you can do about something else over here. But that approach is not the right approach. And I think we have proved by many communication people who made these kinds of improvements that with support, with help, as I mentioned, get your leaders on board first. You can do it. You can do it. But no, they are not going to think that all of a sudden you're going to be able to do what Kula did with the incentive plan. He didn't redesign the incentive plan. He and I worked with the incentive people to redesign that. But I think that's a big step that communication people need to work on, and that is demonstrating that they can do this work.
And I think the second part of that's interesting as well. And what happens when the analysis points to a problem that is not solved by communications?
Well, that's where you get other people involved in the process. You know, certainly when we were at FedEx, we were working with things that had communication implications to it, but we also had an incentive plan that was telling the couriers to get back to the station quickly, and it was countermanding the need for the couriers to be able to help sell. So it turned out to be a communication issue in some respects, but not in the traditional communication way. And in a reward system communicates very powerfully. It may not be something that communication people were trained in journalism school, but I went to journalism school and I can figure some of that stuff out. And if I can, a lot of people can. So that's what I would do. Just understand the fact that sometimes they're going in there without knowledge, but they ought to grab knowledge and bring other people with them.
Thank you, Jim. With 7 minutes left, let's go ahead and get back to the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. What we have here, I put together a document here for everybody, and please feel free to steal all you want from it. But I have a leadership report that I put out. I haven't been putting it out lately because of what's going on as much as I do on every couple of week basis. But it's about all kinds of, you can read here what it includes. It's just tons of stuff about communication, measurement, leadership development, involvement, quality circles, and all kinds of stuff. So if you want to learn more about that, sign up for it. It doesn't cost anything. If you don't like it, get rid of it. Don't do it anymore. But I have a pretty high number of people who seem to like it, and I try to make sure that I'm providing things that's important to them. We also have workshops, how to add value as a strategic advisor. As I've mentioned, a number of the people I've worked with attended one of those workshops, and then we're able to start moving in different directions. So there's some workshops there. I have a suggested reading list. A lot of communication people say, well, what should I be reading about strategy and that sort of thing? And so I put together here 5 different categories about things that I think that communication people, and not just communication people, but marketing people and all kinds of disciplines, that they can draw upon and learn from it. I've got a pretty strong background in transformational change and Lean Six Sigma. It's not because I'm a Lean Six Sigma person to begin with. It's that I had to learn that in order to work with ITT Corporation and some of the others who are Lean Six Sigma. And I now actually teach Lean Six Sigma to people. So I've listed the books here and reading. You don't have to memorize these things, but grab this if you can. So for instance, in the foundational works, The Human Side of Enterprise by Douglas McGregor, Theory X, Theory Y stuff, Drucker stuff. So strategy, I've got a category on strategy here for you. Take a look at some of that stuff, and their leadership and people communication. I really would recommend that strongly. Bosses, True Stories of the Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Shel Holtz, who I'm sure you know, and I are very close friends, and Roger Dupree and his family and my family are all very close friends too. And we helped and do some of the announcement of the book and that sort of the rollout. So I would strongly recommend True Stories of the Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And then there's others down through here that are just standard great steak. I don't know how much of you follow The Great Game of Business or what's called open book management. Jack Stack is the pioneer in that. Somebody I work with closely, have worked with closely over the year. He's a devotee of open book management in the classic sense, and I think you'd find a lot of that to be useful. Here's a lot of good stuff in the transformational change and Lean Six Sigma. I like Kotter's book, Leading Change. I like Deming is classic, so I would strongly recommend that. And then specific concepts and disciplines like Balanced Scorecard, Marketing Management by Kotler, who does great stuff, and The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us by Dan Pink. So there is continued more here that you can look at. I really recommend Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Ralph McKenzie. He was at Hallmark, Gordon McKenzie, I'm sorry. He was at Hallmark for a number of years, and I've done a lot of work with Hallmark over the years. So I recommend that one. And let's see, that's it. So, so there you are. And you got the email address. You got all kinds of information there. If there's anything that you want to test with me, you want to throw it out to me, or if you got a frustration or problem about any of this stuff, I'm used to it. I get lots of these kind of calls and a lot of people who want to move in this direction as well. So thank you very much for those of you who were on this webinar. Thank the IBC folks for all the good work that they have done. And I think we can just make a whole lot of people happier, more successful, and just have a good time.
Thank you, Jim. We truly appreciate that. We are running short of time, so we are going to wrap up. We will have in a moment Jim's email back up on the screen. He did agree to take questions after. There it is. Did agree to take questions. So everyone, we want to make sure you're aware of these things. When you exit the webinar, you'll immediately get a survey. Please take the time to answer the questions for us. It helps us improve. If you would like to present, let us know. The emails are also on the screen. And of course, you will be getting these slides afterwards. For those in the DC area, if you would like to join us for a virtual happy hour, that's next week. Information also on the screen. And of course, don't miss the IABC Virtual World Conference. Learn more at wc.iabc.com. Plus, here are a few additional resources for you. If you have questions about the webinar or the DC Metro Chapter, which is wonderful, by the way, email admin@iabcmetro.org. And for information about the Heritage Region, email communication@iabcheritage.com. And of course, learn more about membership benefits online. We truly thank you for joining us. Again, thank you for for your kindness with our technical issues, and have a wonderful afternoon. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.